By the way, when I was methamphetamine addicted in my late 30s and early 40s, that's truly when I knew with certainty that I was an addict, when I knew with certainty that I was sex addicted. It was at that point when I realized my addictions were getting so severe, so compelling in my life, and ultimately destroying all areas of my life. That's when I knew I was an addict. And when I knew I was an addict, sex addicted, meth addicted, and alcohol addicted, I still wasn't ready to stop. Hey guys, my name is Rob Lopicola, behavioral health and sex addiction recovery coach. And today, what I want to talk with you about is when you are battling with sex addiction and you're getting to the point in your addiction and in your life where you want to change your life, you want to change your design for living, you want to break free from your sex addiction. So you start taking steps to do that. You may go to a 12-step group like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. You may go to a counselor, a therapist. You may talk with a friend. You may go to a religious leader to talk with them about your sex addiction. But generally what happens to most people is an obstacle comes up. Something happens where you decide to no longer go to your 12-step group, where you no longer want to talk to anybody about your sex addiction. You go into a state of denial. And this is fairly typical for most sex addicts who want to change and transform their lives. I was sex addicted for decades. My sex addiction started at a ripe young age of about 14 or 15 years old. And I was addicted to behaviors that I believed was making me feel better about my life. I wanted to numb and escape all of the loneliness and internal pain and turmoil I was facing. And somehow sexual behaviors made me feel better. So at an early age, in my mid to late teens, I was already getting addicted to certain behaviors that made me feel good. But I had no idea it was an addiction. But I always felt ashamed. And I always had some self-hatred and self-loathing and poor self-image from acting out in these behaviors. But unfortunately, into my 20s and 30s and 40s, early 40s, and that's when I finally broke the spell of my sex addiction because I got arrested. I got to a point where I became into a very deplorable state of mind and body, and then I was able to get out of my denial and start really facing the truth. But one of my patterns through my 30s, when I was becoming aware that I might be sex addicted, I kept going into a state of denial. I just didn't want to directly face my sex addiction. I sort of admitted it to a spiritual advisor, Tony, who ultimately saved and changed my life later. For years, I was talking with him and talking about my sex addiction, talking about my alcoholism, but even though I knew I had the hallmarks of addiction, I didn't want to be an addict. I didn't want to admit I was an addict. And I felt if I admitted I was sex addicted and alcohol addicted, later methamphetamine addicted, by the way, when I was methamphetamine addicted in my late 30s and early 40s, that's truly when I knew with certainty that I was an addict, when I knew with certainty that I was sex addicted. It was at that point when I realized my addictions were getting so severe, so compelling in my life, and ultimately destroying all areas of my life. That's when I knew I was an addict. And when I knew I was an addict, sex addicted, meth addicted, and alcohol addicted, I still wasn't ready to stop. I had to get arrested. I had to get to a place of complete and utter desperation for me to start really facing the truth, taking off those masks, and doing something about my addiction. But during the course of my sex addiction awareness, which started in my early 30s, and I didn't get arrested until I was 42 from horrible state of living. For 10 years, I kept progressing down the rabbit hole of sex addiction, alcohol addiction, and meth addiction. But sex addiction's always been my core addiction. But whenever I would talk about my sex addiction or start practicing behaviors to escape the sex addiction, I just kept repeating the denial of the addiction. I kept going back to denial. I would numb myself acting out sexually and deny the fact that I was sex addicted. One, I didn't want to be a sex addict. And two, I certainly didn't want to give up my compulsive sexual behaviors. Can you relate to that? I didn't want to admit I was an addict because I thought that was weak. I thought that made me pathetic and dirty. And I didn't want to have to be weak to anything. I wanted to have power over my life. And I didn't want to give up the compulsive sexual behaviors that made me feel good. And on some level, it defined who I was. So I kept going in the state of denial. I was denying I was a sex addict. I negotiated with my sex addiction. But when I became methamphetamine addicted, that's when all bets were off. And that's when I truly started getting on my knees, praying to something greater than me, God, something out there to take away this addiction. And I wanted to stop so badly. And I needed to stop. But it was so powerful, it had such a grip on me that I truly felt like I couldn't stop. There was no stopping my meth and sex addiction combination. I now developed a symbiotic relationship with sex and methamphetamine. And if I didn't have the meth, I was certainly drinking, and I drank a lot. But all of it was to lower my inhibitions to act out sexually. Giving up my sex addiction, giving up my meth addiction and alcohol, I had no idea who I would be, what type of man would I be if I gave up these addictions. Can you relate to any of this? What I'm talking about, can you relate to any of these? Can you relate to the denial? Can you relate to the fact that you don't want to be sex addicted? Can you relate to the fact that with your ego, you want to have power over your life? You don't want to have to surrender to some addiction. Do you want to continue your sex and meth addiction or alcohol addiction or any of those symbiotic relationships you have with your sex addiction, because you don't know who you will be if you no longer act out in your sex addiction or any of your other addictions? You feel as though if you stop acting out sexually, you're going to miss out on all the fun, on all the opportunities, because those opportunities are so important to you. And you don't want to lose out or miss out on any opportunity for sexual pleasure and excitement. Can you relate to that? But can you also relate to the fact it's destroying your life? It's taking away your morals and values. You're behaving in ways that are somewhat degrading when it comes to your drug use or some of your sexual behaviors. And you're self-loathing and self-deprecating and hate yourself. And you don't want to tell anybody what you're doing because you feel as though they're going to judge you harshly because you're judging yourself harshly. And yet you just seemingly can't escape your sex addiction. And I'm going to tell you, the only way that you're going to be able to break your sex addiction, the only way you're going to be able to live a life free from all of your addictions, is to step out of denial and face the truth, and then talk with someone about it. Admit the truth. Admit that you're a sex addict. Admit that you're a meth addict. Talk to someone who you know won't judge you, someone that loves you unconditionally. My coach told me I need to bring everything to the light, because in light, darkness can't exist, and you need to bring everything to the light. And the only way you're going to change your life, I don't care how much research you do, how many therapists you go to, how many 12-step meetings you go to, the only way that you're going to recover and change your life from a sex-addicted life to a life of healthy sexual expression. And I say that because you're not looking for a life of no sex. You are looking for a life of healthy sexual expression. And that's what I want to help you get to. A life where you can express yourself sexually, free from the guilt, the shame, the self-deprecation, and the isolation of it all. You deserve a life of healthy sexual expression where you can enjoy sex, and yet you don't hate yourself, and you don't have to live in isolation or secrecy. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you are willing to do whatever it takes. But you got to be to the point where you are done, where you no longer want to live like this. And if you're not ready, you're not ready. There's no need to keep doing research unless you're gathering information for maybe one day when you will be ready. But if you are ready and you really want to make a change, I'm going to offer you a free 10-step strategy session right now. I'll have the link below. You could go to my website, sexaddictionrelief.com, but I'll have the link below, and you can sign up for a free 30-minute 10-step strategy session. These are great steps that will guide you to breaking free from your sex addiction and experiencing a life you deserve. Free from shame and guilt and self-deprecation, isolation, and all of that. And lead a life where you are truly peaceful, serene, and fulfilled, where you could save your relationship, you could save your career, you could save your financial stability, and you could save your life and your future and your freedom. So take advantage of the 10-step strategy session. Again, I have the link below. And remember, I post a new video here every Tuesday. So if you have not subscribed to my channel yet, please subscribe. Hit the like button on this video so it gets out there more. And you could also hit the bell so you get notified every time I post a new video, which is every Tuesday. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you got something out of my experience, strength, and hope that you can relate and you can change your life. I did 12 years sober. And I was scared to death to change my life, but I did because I was at such a low place in life. And if you're at that low place, you can do it too. We'll see you around next Tuesday.